C++, which was a thing back then, also still on DOS. Websites are appearing outside of CERN, the first ones. And the GPL v2 is just released. So free software is something which is actually still quite new. And then on the park bench in Trondheim, Norway, that's a story. Two Norwegian programmers who are working together on a database, and they need a UI for that. So they decide that maybe it would be great to create something like an object-oriented display system. And they come up with the idea to create a cross-platform GUI toolkit in C++. They call that Qt. They found a company which then is named Trolltech, and in 1995 they released the first version of Qt, Qt 0.9. And it looks like this, beautiful thing. You know this example from the documentation. I think it probably is still there somewhere. So this is 1995, and that's the story of Qt. And one of the really innovative things Eirik and Howard did is decided on a dual licensing business model. So they had the Qt Profession, which was their commercial offering for all platforms and all projects, including proprietary. So that's where they made money from. And innovative thing they did is they decided on releasing a Qt free edition as well under a free edition license for software projects which were free software. So free projects using free software on X11 got this edition for free. The other part of the story we have to tell is the story of KDE. So 1 year later, in 1996, PCs are still a thing. Windows has actually grown, is there. Unix has something called the Common Desktop Environment, CDE, quite an enterprisey thing. And Linux is also coming along. Kernel 2.0 is just released, and there are a number of Linux distributions. So the big ones, Debian, Red Hat, SUSE, they are already around at the time, and they are starting to becoming more and more successful. But if you look at the state of the graphical use on Linux, it's still quite sad. This is how a Linux looked like. Not very convenient, not very consistent, quite difficult to control, and certainly not made for ordinary people, but developers who were using their command line tools in this window manager. So this situation obviously was something which changed. And in 1996, in October, Matthias Ettrich, a German student, he started a Usenet post. And he asked for programmers who wanted to join a project to create an actual user interface, a graphical user interface for users, which was for normal people, not only the developers. And in his first email, he had actually two firm decisions. One was the stuff will be distributed under the terms of the GPL. So this was the start of a free software project. This was meant to be to use the power of the many people who are around. And the other decision is that this should be based on Qt, because he saw Qt as a very strong technical foundation to actually implement this somewhat cleaner desktop, how he calls it. And he also recognized Trolltech's business model and said, yeah, this kind of marketing, free source code for free software, that's something what I like. And this was actually the base which actually made it possible to develop KDE on Qt. So he asked for 20, 30 programmers to join, and that happened. And in 1997, there was the first KDE presentation at the Linux Congress in Würzburg. That was an actually quite high-profile event back then. So quite a number of prominent people joined there. Ted So was there, Eric Raymond was there, Dirk Hunnel was there, John Maddock Hall. They all talked about Linux, all kind of things, free software. And also Qt had a strong presence. So Howard was there talking about Qt. Kalle Dahlheimer, who was one of the first people joining Matthias' call and one of the core developers back then, he had a talk about programming on Linux. And Matthias himself, he talked about KDE and showed the first screenshot of KDE at the stage. So this is a screenshot of the original proceedings of the Congress showing KDE pre-release, the current state back then. And this also already looks quite promising. It was a huge success. So the story goes that there was another project, desktop project, which had a talk planned for after the KDE presentation. And after they had seen what KDE presented there, they canceled the talk and left the conference. So KDE had quite an impact there. Proceedings, what Matthias wrote there. So sorry, this is in German, but that's the original. And he basically said three things there in this section. So the first one is, Qt is the only possible solution from a technical point of view to actually be able to implement that. So they checked different things, and all these different widgets around there, lots of different things, but not very well developed and quite different. And not really. So he saw the chance to some unification there and using Qt as the technical language. And he also hinted at a problem KDE had, and that was Qt's license. So critics said Qt is not free. And what's interesting is to see how Matthias framed it. So he put a sentence there, tongue-in-cheek. Yeah, we created a mailing list for discussing Qt license, so the people who are doing the actual work are not disturbed by these discussions. But it was a big discussion, and it followed for a couple of times after that. And the big question there was, how free is free? So is Qt actually free software or not? And a lot of quite influential people from the FSF, from Red Hat, from the GIMP team, they argued that the Qt free edition license doesn't fulfill the requirements of free software. So it wasn't the GPL, but it was a homegrown license. And it had some conditions in there which were not compatible with what the GPL was doing. So people argued Qt is not free enough. The intention, of course, was to make it as free as it's needed for free software, but this was not accepted by everybody. And the other big question was, what happens if Trolltech stops developing Qt? What happens if the toolkit is discontinued, if the company goes away? What happens with that? And the license didn't really allow changing it and further developing it. So this was one of the open questions the community had to answer, and which led to quite a debate. And there was another thread. Kalle Dahlheimer said that you have to understand that in this time, it was actually common that companies would buy other companies just to shut down projects. And one of the fears there was that Microsoft would come and actually shut down Qt in some way. So Microsoft was in a situation back then when it was really actively fighting Linux. So this was quite real. And you can see it. This is a famous advertisement from a German computer magazine where Microsoft actually said, yeah, if you use Linux, you will get mutations. You don't have it under control. Then later in 1997, there was a pivotal meeting in the history of KDE. KDE 1, the developer meeting in Arnsberg. This was the first time all the KDE developers got together. Arnsberg is a small German town. There is a manufacturer of waffle makers, actually, who was using Linux. They had some Linux fans, and they set up some X terminals for the KDE developers to work on. They invited them to Arnsberg, so they had the meeting there. And it came at a pretty delicate time, because 2 weeks before this meeting, GNOME was founded as an answer or a reaction to the license question. And so there was competition out there. And Trolltech sent Eirik and Arndt to Germany to join the meeting and to work together with the KDE people, and obviously also to discuss the question of the license. And you have to realize that at that time, Trolltech was just 6 employees, and KDE had something like 200 developers working in KDE. So the strategy of Qt worked. So they got this huge community adoption. They got this many people who actually used Qt. And on the other hand, it also worked for KDE, strong toolkit in Qt. So they had the discussions about how do they deal with the license question. And Trolltech made a pretty bold offer there. So they said, okay, we want to have a contract between the community and the company, which makes sure that Qt stays free forever. So the KDE people were a bit shocked by that. They didn't expect that much from that, but in the end, of course, that was a pretty good solution, and they went ahead with that. And then later, in 1998, beginning of 1998, the statement of intent was signed by the KDE side, Kalle and Matthias, and the Qt side with Eric and Toby. And they laid down the two main things there which the agreement should have. And the one was to have this foundation which makes sure that the Qt free edition is available and updated for free software development. And the second part, that if this is not happening, if the company is stopping the Qt free edition, that it shall be released under the BSD license, which would allow a lot more liberal things to do with the toolkit to actually keep up things. And we'll talk about that later. So this was the agreement they had, and then Trolltech hired prestigious Norwegian lawyer and had to explain to them that they actually wanted to give away something for free and want to make sure that the company doesn't have a chance to change that. It was an interesting challenge, but once the lawyer understood that, they were ready to go, and they wrote the actual agreement. So how does it work? The thing is that at this time, there wasn't a legal entity on behalf of KDE. So the first thing which was happening was that KDE EV was founded. This happened at the end of 1997. And Trolltech EV created together this foundation, which is called the KDE Free Qt Foundation. The reason to do that in a separate foundation was that in the case Trolltech would go bankrupt, then it would get hard to get access to the assets of Trolltech, and of course the software Qt, the licenses, would be an asset. So they said, okay, we put that into an independent foundation, so that is something which can't be taken away. And the license agreement which Trolltech gives to the KDE Free Qt Foundation gives the guarantee that the KDE Free Qt Foundation can then actually do what is necessary to keep Qt free. And the foundation is actually a very small thing. It only consists of two representatives of both sides, and they build the board of the foundation, which takes the decision. And there's a twist there, because KDE has a majority in case of ties. So if there is a 2-2 voting, then KDE decides about the result, which gives KDE the leverage to actually keep the license free of Qt in case something happens. And the primary tool to do that is that the license agreement says if no major updates of Qt, of the Qt free edition, happen, 12 months, then the foundation can release the Qt free edition under the BSD license. And the consequences of that are it protects Qt against bankruptcy, takeover, and change of plans, because under the BSD license, you actually have the permission to use it for all kinds of projects, open source as well as proprietary. So that's a very liberal license. And it also allows to build, again, a new company with a similar dual licensing business model. That's something which you can do with the BSD license. You can incorporate into proprietary offerings, but this wouldn't be possible with the GPL. So then in 1998, the agreement finally is signed in June. There's an announcement, and this has a nice statement in it. It says, we believe the founding of the KDE Free Qt Foundation to be an unprecedented, groundbreaking step, ushering in a new era of software development, allowing the KDE project, the free software community, all free software developers, as well as commercial software developers, to prosper in a mutually supportive fashion. Quite a bold statement. I think it reflects the mindset of KDE and Qt at that time, but it's actually quite powerful and has carried on the project and the foundation over the years. This is the actual agreement, which was signed, 3 pages. And then a few weeks later, KDE 1.0 was released based on Qt 1.2, and it looked like this. This is still not a beautiful desktop. It's a great start, and the project has really a lot of momentum. And it evolved. And over the time, also the license of Qt evolved. Trolltech added the QPL after some time, which then was actually accepted as an open source license. Later they changed it to the GPL, and this was the point in time which actually ended all the discussions about if Qt is free software or not. KDE also evolved, had major updates, and the agreement in 2004 was updated as well to reflect the change in licensing, also in the releases of Qt and how KDE used it. 2005 also added under the GPL in Qt 4, but at that time it wasn't covered by the agreement yet. One of the challenges there with the agreement is that the question, what is the Qt-free edition, actually is the crucial question of the whole agreement. So what actually means discontinued? What means major update? What is part of Qt? What do you do with deprecated modules and stuff like that? Also, what platforms are covered by the agreement. At the writing of the agreement, for example, embedded platforms weren't around, so nobody thought about that. What about Windows? What about mobile phones and stuff like that? Also, what licenses are acceptable? What happens with the GPL version 3, which was relevant at some point? So this is the crucial thing, which always needed some discussion and debate and continuous working on the agreement to adapt it to the current state. And then with the discussions which were happening in the KDE Free Qt Foundation, this actually was quite helpful to create this balance, to balance the interests between the community and the company. And the foundation gave this platform to actually have these discussions. Then in 2008, there was an email to KDE EV by the Trolltech management. And it said, yeah, Trolltech is acquired by Nokia. So this was the moment where the agreement was put to test. This was what the agreement was designed for. And people were actually interested in what was happening there. We are quite aware that this would be an interesting situation. But in this case, Nokia actually went with that in a very responsible way. So they contacted us very early. KDE was at the table. We had meetings with the Nokia management in Frankfurt. That was a fun where the Nokia managers visited us in our then very small office with half an employee, shared with the Wikimedia Foundation. And we had about Qt and KDE there. And then we had the invitation back to the Nokia headquarters in Helsinki, which was, of course, quite a contrast. But the great thing was we discussed these things on eye level because it was clear that the agreement was in place and it would stay in place, and that we would have to talk about how we do the best with that for the communities. Nokia also added the LGPL. There was a third agreement to reflect the changes, and Qt 5 then was developed under open governance when Nokia opened Qt to actually contributions of more people. They were quite ambitious. Sebastian Nyström, who was running the Qt part of Nokia at that time, he said in the keynote on the Qt Dev Days in 2009 that they wanted to increase the reach of Qt tenfold. And that's something clearly you can't do without the community outreach. So over the years, more evolution. Nokia, of course, changed plans. That's a different story. Digia acquired Qt. Qt 5 was released. There was the fourth agreement reflecting the changes. Then the Qt company was formed and eventually went public. Another agreement reflected the changes there. And that's basically the state where we are today. We have this agreement in place. We are in constructive discussions with the Qt company, and it still is valid. There's one twist in the story which is interesting. The agreement also was built to prevent selling Qt to Microsoft. Microsoft actually acquired most part of Nokia in 2013, and this is where Qt already was in the hands of Digia. So also there the agreement worked. What's the end of the story? Well, we can say mission accomplished. Qt stayed free. Qt stayed free across multiple acquisitions. And that's what the agreement was meant to do. So this worked. But of course, this is not the end of the story, because Qt is still there and KDE is still there, and they have hopeful, gloriful future. So the agreement will still be there and serve this purpose. But there are a couple of things which can be learned from it. And one is that this was really a solid thing. It served for more than 20 years. Qt stayed free. And KDE and Qt both had quite good success and impact. So this certainly was a good foundation. And it worked in two ways. One was that the license guaranteed the present freedom. So once you had the code under the GPL of Qt and KDE, of course, you could do whatever you want with that under the conditions of the license, but only with the code you already had. And the foundation guaranteed also something about the future freedom, so that the code would be developed in an open and free way in the future as well. And through the foundation, you had this mechanism to foster a dialogue and this balancing between community and commercial interests. So quite a strong setup, which actually keeps things free. One question is sometimes asked, what about a fork? If I have the code under the GPL, I can just fork it. Why do I need the agreement? That's true, but it would split the community, and it also wouldn't allow the dual license business model on the fork. So the more sustainable version is to not fork, but work under the agreement, work under the current situation. The other question which is asked sometimes is this a model for other projects as well? So could you use that in other projects? And the answer is, there is a certain type of projects where this might actually be a good fit. So the typical use case would be something like a single vendor project where you have one company controlling an open source project, and they are following some dual license model. And for that to work, they need a CLA, which gives them the rights to also release a proprietary version. And the problem there is that this is an asymmetric setup. So the company has more rights than the community has. And that, of course, can be a demotivation for people to actually participate in this project. The KDE Free Qt Foundation style setup is a way to balance this. So that there you add something on the other side where the community gets a say in the future of the project and gives some security about the freedom of the project for the future. And this is a way to motivate actually people to contribute, because they know it's not only the company profiting from that, but they also give something back and they are obliged to actually do that. That's what the KDE Free Qt Foundation does. One thing to be aware of is that this is a complex thing. The agreement is now 14 pages, not 3 pages anymore. Most of that is about the question, what actually forms Qt? How has that developed? What do we have to take into account for that? But that's actually the thing you need to do, and that's a result of these fruitful discussions about how free do we do it, how is the balance between that, and how can we balance the interests in a mutually beneficial way. And the other thing, which also is, I think, quite important, it takes courage to do that. So it takes this courage of the original founders of Trolltech, which said we give it away for free. And this is an important thing, because we didn't know if it would work, but it actually did. So the KDE Free Qt Foundation, what's the heart of it? It's the freedom. It's the freedom which is also a strong value we have in KDE, which is driving our work. And we do that because freedom is good for business, freedom is good for community, and freedom is good for the world. And I want to close with a quote from the original announcement. So, to prosper in a mutually fashion. This is what the KDE Free Qt Foundation set out to do, and this is what it did and what it still does. So that's what I wanted to tell you about the KDE Free Qt Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelius. We have unfortunately used up the entire time, so there won't be much time for questioning, or none at all, since we have to set up the next speaker here. There is 3 questions in the shared notes. Maybe you can have a look at those and discuss that in chat meanwhile.
Okay, fair enough. I will do that. Thank you all.
Thank you. I can't hear you, Aleix.
Boop.
Now I can hear you. Okay. Did you see the private chat?
No.
Okay, then let's start with the next talk. That is Mr. President himself, Aleix about KDE's products.
Thank you, Volker. All right, so this is going to be a bit of a weird presentation for me because it's kind of a bit outside of my comfort zone, but on the other hand, it's something that I've missed in what we do for a while. So what I want you to get from this presentation is a little bit of ideas or inspiration on how you could focus your work into making sure that we are carrying and doing the most out of our work overall. First of all, let me present myself. Anything? Do you see something? Well, I guess that my presentation slide is gone. So let me just explain it. My name is Aleix. I am a KDE developer. I have been for over a decade right now. I'm also the KDE president, as I was introduced as well. I'm employed by Blue Systems doing software work on KDE, and I am based in Barcelona in the lovely Mediterranean coast. Now, what I wanted to reflect on today is that we're all consumer of things. We are all very used to using consumer products. It's what economy has been about over the last century. And well, it has its upsides, and they are kind of all geared towards of being able to use things and use them easily. And I think that this is something very directly related to what we do as KDE, which is create things so that specifically pieces of software, so that people can enjoy them and use them as tools, right? Not unlike other software products, not unlike I don't know, a bag of chips, right? When you need to be able to get emails, you will get Kmail. When you need to get carbohydrates, you will buy pasta, right? So we're all familiarized with the concept of product, and in the end, it's a lot of what we create. We create products for people to check their emails and a bunch of stuff. Now, I think that it would be interesting for a second to take a step back and think about how a consumer, somebody who's used to buying bag of chips and someone who's used to buying cars and TVs, well, they're gonna consume our software, right? Because while many people use it, thousands and some people say millions use our software. Well, we have all wondered why it isn't billions, and in the end, part of our task is to make it easy, not just to have our products used, but to make sure that everybody can reach technology, hardware, computation, internet, etc. Right? So that's what I would like to discuss. And since I didn't really know how to have this conversation, I reached out to my university notes, where they talked about something that is called the marketing mix. Something that economists like a lot to do is to have acronyms for things. So these are the 4 P's of the marketing mix, which I'm going to talk about. And then I would like to see how they match what we do in KDE. And actually, I think that a lot of it would also apply to any free software project. It's not like we're doing all that worse than the rest. It's I really care about KDE. Now, first of all, we have the product. We need to define it. When we talk about bag of chips, it's not only like the potatoes, right? It's the potatoes processed in a very specific way so that it's easy for you to consume. Not unlike our software products, right? When we talk about why is KIG important, for example, KIG is a geometry application for educational students. Well, it is important not because people don't have other ways to draw circles and lines, right? It's because we create a product that has been thought from the start so that people can learn, can do their geometry work over that piece of software. What's like Plasma, for example, as well, right? Plasma's idea is to acknowledge that people will want to have a computer, some software, and they will want to make the best out of it. And well, we try to simplify it by providing a graphical user interface, but a lot of more stuff, right? We have all of the services around it. Everything is geared towards creating this one product that should satisfy whoever consumes it. And while we all know that Plasma fits in the whole community in a much more complex light, we are all aware about how all of Linux works. We're still something that people are perceived directly, right? While we are part of the big thing, people expect us to be delivering it as a product and actually be as good as it is from when they buy it from something more commercial that would be, like I said, a pack of chips. If a bag of chips when you're eating explodes on your face, you will be angry and you will start, insulting people. Something similar happens when the software explodes. Now, second aspect, the second P would be price. So we're used that when we buy something, we get we have to pay some money in exchange. Price goes much beyond that. Actually, something that we have seen on the internet. Yeah, something worth noting is that this marketing mix is something from the 70s or 80s. It's, well, from before the internet. But while they still apply, it might be a bit outdated in this regard. Google, without going much farther, have shown us how money is not the only price that you can pay when you're using a product. You can pay with your data, for example. Facebook, actually, it's been what the internet has been about over the last 10 to 20 years at least, right? But there are other prices as well. There is money, there is security, there is privacy. It can also be that you have to go through hoops installing Arch Linux and then all of that, right? And I think that at the moment, the price of using what we create is going a bit along these lines. That's my opinion for sure. We have a place. Now, when we buy the bag of chips, the place would be the supermarket, right? When we talk about Google services, it's probably google.com or Gmail or whatever. I don't really know. For us, what is it? And actually, if you saw the KDE All About the Apps talk, if you saw the Wayland talk, I think that there is a lot of effort that we're putting, not just KDE, but overall in the Linux community and free software community to make this place more defined and actually much easier to reach, because it has been, like I said earlier, and also in my opinion, a bit complex, especially given the premise has been, in a lot of cases, downloading weird things from weird websites, buying a computer with an operating system and swapping it for another one that is not really supported. This is a weird place to go to, right? Nevertheless, it's there, it's working. I am sure that out of the 70 many people who are in this room, a lot of us have done it. So it's not that bad. And many of us, we're still also working on the alternatives, right? For example, the KDE Slim book is also another way of looking at that problem. The app stores are as well, etc. And the last P is promotion. Now, we have a place, we need to make sure that people go into this place, how to make sure that this happens. For example, we have the dot, we have Planet, we have the talks that we go to conferences and talk about what we do. We have the community, the Linux user groups that are in every city, and they talk to their peers and explain when our software would be good for them. All of these are small pieces into this promotion machine that that we are part of in the end. Podcasts, we've all seen also like these street signs for some projects. I remember seeing one from Firefox 10 years ago or so, and I felt like it was weird, like these logos are supposed to be only in my laptop, but it wasn't the case anymore. There's many ways of doing this. Writing books, documentation can be also part of promotion. It's also part of the product as well. Everything is kind of connected and works with each other. Now, I've presented these 4 things. I'm gonna do my best effort into analyzing how some of our software fits in this consumer-centric world, and maybe we can see, like not today, I'm not gonna tell you what to do right now, but we can see new ways where we can work further. Like I said, not like we're doing something terrible, but we need to look into the future, right? Something that brings like brights my red light every time that I see it is when I see maintainers, developers that don't really take responsibility of the delivery process. This has admittedly not been very easy to do up until recently, but technology has evolved a lot, and our infrastructure is also so much better, so that we can start thinking about those things. And someone who clearly has done this very well is Krita, for example. Now, what do I mean by taking responsibility of the creative to delivery process? Well, we have some people thinking about how to create software, what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like to the user. We need these people to be involved into for one, the feedback that comes back from the user, to make sure that they can react when something doesn't work like it should. We cannot assume that we're gonna do everything perfect, because in this life, nothing is, and so isn't our software. So as part of this iteration process, we need to make sure that the people who are responsible in the beginning can also be responsible in the end. Something that has frustrated me, and I'm going to give you an example, it was, I think it was maybe 10 years ago when we were part of the Brazilian education deployment. We had a lot of people using KDE software over there. Some were just KDE Edu apps, some others were Plasma. But in the end, what really shocked me is that while we were having like hundreds of millions of people using the software, the amount of feedback we got was still quite minimal, right? And how was this possible? Well, when talking to the organizers of the deployment, they started to tell me about all of this infrastructure that they had to get the feedback from the teachers, because good reasons actually, right? Like their English wasn't that good, or They didn't feel like they were technically capable of communicating with us. These are all things that we should make sure that stops being a problem over time if we want to make sure that, if we want to be able to continue saying that we care about users, that we care about what people are doing, and that we can offer solutions for that. And another very good example about that is KDE Connect, where it has two sides. It has the Linux Qt side, and then it has the Android side. And when discussing the development feature, the Linux side always needs to be super backwards compatible, because people who use Debian will stay on an old unmaintained version for many years, when Android people will get an update automatically from F-Droid or Google Play with the last version, which is the thing that has been QA'd by the maintainers at any point. So it's really awkward that we have a better communication with our users on Android, and especially on Google Play, than it is on actually the platforms that we're comfortable with using and actually we're telling people to use. I know that there's ways to improve that, and many of us are working towards that, but I think that it would be very important to make sure that we keep these as an end goal, rather than that thing that is happening in parallel with my daily life. Because in the end, if somebody has a problem, they tell you, and you cannot, well, you can solve the problem, but that person won't ever get the fix, or they will get the fix eventually. There is a lot of frustration that gets unresolved. We need to make sure that frustration is not part of our daily lives. Now, we need to make sure that we get to do this as a team. You have a lot of people you can rely on, and well, use them. Talk to us, talk to everyone, and let's make sure that the issues get resolved and that you can do what you want. Now, when thinking about the kind of product we have apps, we have systems, much like Plasma, actually mostly Plasma, and we have frameworks, which are kind of a weird product in itself, but actually it's a good explanation of what we're talking about. An example of an app, K-Tuberling, I was talking about K earlier, but what is our price, the first P? Well, the price of K-Tuberling is mostly €0, and possibly, well, you could do a donation. That's kind of part of it. You could hire somebody if it's not doing something that you would like it to do. That's kind of it. Oh, sorry, I was not the first piece still. Oh, sorry, I forgot the first P, was product. What is the product? Product is the app itself with the whatever features it has at the right moment. The place, well, the place actually, it will depend a lot on the platform you're on. If you're in Android, it will be either F-Droid or Google Play. I actually think that K-Tuberling is in Google Play, or at least it was sometime in the past. If you're on Windows, it should be the Windows Store probably, or downloading MSI files. I don't know. I don't really use Windows at all. But if I was the K-Tuberling maintainer, I would have to get involved in that if I want my Windows users to be happy. And that's a good if, right? You can decide that you don't care about something, but then you need to be conscious about it. You cannot say, I'm going to hope that somebody packages my application and hope for the best because it should work. And actually, it probably will just work. But you need to know where your application is being used at. And then on Linux at the moment, well, the answer is very, very diverse. On Debian will be apt, or probably also Flatpak/snap. Flatpak/snap should work somewhat on everywhere. Well, it depends. Also, it's important to remember that we need to to focus on those, because we cannot have every maintainer supporting everything ever, right? And then last would be promotion, which would be, well, the planet. Everyone, remember, the planet is super important. Whatever you say there reaches a lot of people. Use it. Now, here I have just 1 minute. I'm going to go through Plasma very quickly. Or actually, I'm not. I am going to leave you the task of doing it yourself. You can do the process. I think that it's an interesting thought process to do, and you will learn from it. Use the team. You don't need to work alone. Actually, if you're working alone, it's probably because you're doing something wrong. Don't do it. Spread your work. There's people who will be interested in some parts specifically. Use that for your in your advantage. Do not blame if something is not working, especially since you control the process. It's something that you can fix. We are relying only on free software, and as a team, we should be able to solve any of the problems. If something is not working on Qt, it's not acceptable to tell a user this is not working on Qt. If something is not working on Qt, you send a patch to Qt and enjoy your life. And when I'm talking about Qt, it can be any part of our stack. Frameworks, it can be Linux, it can be whatever. All right. And thank you. Sorry for being a bit over time.
Thank you, Aleix. You're almost perfectly in time. We still have 4 minutes left for questions. And if we look into the shared notes, there's actually 4 questions. So we have 1 minute each. The first one is, what do you think about Lenovo or Dell selling Linux laptops?
I think it's great. It's something, actually, I think that it should be the right place for Plasma. At the moment, though, Plasma is not available over there. Something that should be worked on, I guess. And actually, the whole conversation about how that should happen would be really interesting. It's not straightforward, but I think that we should strive to go in this direction. Doesn't need to be the big manufacturers either. I think that the important thing is to have something that we can tell people to use, right? Slimbook has been a good first case for that. There might be others. There are others.
Okay. The second question is, what do you think about the Fediverse? Something like getting normal users from Twitter to Mastodon.
I don't really have a strong opinion. I try to be part of every of these networks because I think that it's the right place to be on. But I admittedly cannot really put all of my effort over there because what I care about is actually people using free software, people about using our software, enjoying our software. And I am not going to put myself in the position of going somewhere where people are not around. As KDE, though, if you care about the Fediverse, I would encourage you to join the KDE promo group. I am sure that they will embrace you with a smile and let you do what you care about. Okay,
then the next question is a bit longer. Something that has worked for other communities to improve their product focus is to get to know their users by surveying them with simple questions to guide prioritization. As a free software community, we can ask of our users input better than a bug tracker or Reddit. Those tools fail to quantify the tendencies. I feel asking what is working for you, where is your software letting you down, etc. could guide us. Do you think that could help us?
I think that it's super important. Actually, earlier this year, we worked actually with Volker, who's sharing key user feedback, which is actually all about that. We haven't really used all of the potential, and actually the polling thing you're asking about is actually part of it. When we do it, we will do our best to ask the right questions. I think that it's very important, especially because we don't want to only work for the people who are having problems. I think that it's very important to know what makes people happy about what we do and not have this bias of whatever is not working is what is important, because it's not always the case, and we might be losing opportunities over there. But also, again, if you're interested in working on that, join us and say, this is going to be my turf, right?
Okay, then the last question still fits in. How do you see Neon fitting into the idea of KDE taking more responsibility for connecting directly with users?
I think that Neon has already done a lot in this direction. I remember telling years ago, Jonathan and Harald, about how I was getting a lot more feedback on Discover, which is some software that I had been working on since a long time, from Neon, than I was getting from any of the other distros. And actually, at that moment, Neon was just starting, right? So people were not, well, there weren't that many people back then as there are right now using Neon. There could be more, I guess. The Linux ecosystem is very complex. I am not going to be telling people what it should look like. I know what I want. And I think that if you've listened to me, you will kind of get an idea. I don't think that actually Neon is the end goal, but I think that it's definitely a very interesting tool. Right now, if I want to tell people I need you to test this feature on Plasma, I think that it's probably one of the best ways to do so. But there are others. There's OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. It's also an interesting way to do it. And I'm sure there are many others as well.
I think our time is up. Thank you again, Aleix, for that presentation. We'll now have a 4-minute break, and then we'll continue with Johan. Okay, then let's welcome Johan for the next presentation. Johan is going to tell us about Linux in cars.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm actually joining from a car, so I just want to double check. Is the audio okay, Volker?
Yeah, your audio is perfect.
Sounds great. Yeah, so last weekend in the summer house, a slight change of location really late before, so praying to the LTE gods, but yeah, it will be fine. So hi, I'm Johan. I actually work for Ambition, one of our sponsors. I also run a company on the side called CodeRise. I run a conference called FOSS North in Sweden that some people might recognize from. I've been doing lots of Qt embedded Linux and with a focus on automotive in the past decade. I also tinker with licensing and so on. So yeah. I just want to say before starting here that all opinions are my own. I agreed to talking here before my employer decided to sponsor. So these are my own personal views. But yeah, before we dive into the whole problem space, let's have a look at how does an infotainment system look today. And this is a blurred picture of the architecture from Geneva, which is a standardization organization that works with open source solutions around this. And I can just overlay it with these boxes where we see that we at the very top we have apps. And these are, of course, vendor specific to a large extent to sort of make it car specific and get that brand feeling. And then you have a huge number of services. This might be anything from workshop, production, telephony, media playback, whatnot, everything that goes into a car, all the services that you need. And then you have a base platform at the very base bottom, which is a classical embedded Linux system. And if we look at this and see where do we have open source, we do have open source in the base platform. We do have Linux. Some of these services are largely based around open source to various degrees, and some at the very top, the brighter colored ones, there is actually no intention to make them open source because that's where sort of the brand differentiation comes in. So then it's more up to the automaker to make that open source rather than to the community. I actually like to color this picture this way. So what is not open source? We have lots and lots of red boxes in here that would be good to address. And why is this? So my takeaway from this is that you have requirements that are only piled on project from project. You copy the last requirement set and you add some more. You copy the last project again and add some more. And sometimes you can really tell that this requirement is actually a functional requirement and this one is a supplier that cocked up, so they need to clarify something because last time they had a fight over it. And when you start like this from a very strict requirement set, of course, open source components doesn't fit one-to-one. You need someone who steps in between and make adaptations, or let's call it integration work, that leverages the open source components into building something that fulfills the requirements. And that's one of the parts that is really hard, because then somebody needs to pick up the open source component and then really drive it in that direction and sort of invest in it and do that together with the community. So even when you do that, you don't just take the component and put something proprietary on top of it. So we really need to invert the direction here. You need to start from what's out there that could help a car maker to get the experience they want, and then to specify what has to go on top of the open source components of the shared platform rather than the other way around. That's the industrial problem, I'd say. Let's see, and I mean, why is this a problem? It could be one way to. One thing is to say that we want open source and it's a good thing and there are ethical aspects with it. But even if you look at it from the business side of an automotive maker, it's not invented here driven development where you start from your own requirement set and sort of everything has to be custom made to your needs is a very expensive way of building anything. You also end up in very strong vendor lock-ins historically. I've been to numerous OEMs in Asia, US, and Europe, and it's a situation throughout the industry. The maintenance costs are huge because you maintain your own software stack rather than using what's upstream. That's also one of the risks of falling behind. So it's quite common to sort of adopt an open source component and not follow along, which means that at the end of the day, you're maintaining your old fork by yourself anyway. And really the biggest one is that you can get access to smart people outside of the automotive industry, which is a huge boost, because software in automotive is not where all software people work. It's a rather small niche. But what are the open source actors here? So this is just a very quick recap from what I've seen. So 2009, Geneva was started, formed expert groups, had industry meetings, discussed on how to do this. And I mean, Geneva to me is a big driver in making sure that we actually have a Linux foundation for these systems these days, even though the services on top aren't open source. They build components that they then create a development platform to demonstrate how the components can be integrated. But components are generally reusable outside of Geneva. Since a few years back, Geneva have sort of focused on the coexisting with other systems, on how to integrate a Linux-based system into a hypervised system with other systems in parallel and so on. So the component development has, in my opinion, slowed down a bit. There is also another organization joining the market. So 2016, the Automotive Grade Linux project was started. This is run within the Linux Foundation. It has a similar structure, so expert groups for the various topics, meeting, writing requirements, trying to find someone to implement it and build things. But I'd say that AGL in general builds their development platform first, and the components are built for that platform, which in my experience means that some of the components are harder to use if you don't buy it all. They are more tightly integrated. Both these organizations come from this classical direction that we have an expert group, we write requirements, and then the intention is to fix an open source component to suit those requirements. But they still come from that perspective, the top down, this is what the car needs, and then we build it. So it's kind of interesting when we had this third one entering. It was announced in 2017. The Polestar cars are starting to reach market now. So I'd say 2020 is the year when they're active. The same goes for the other organizations. I mean, Geneva was formed in 2009. There weren't Geneva-based infotainment systems back in 2009. This is basically Google and the OEMs. They have a very strong infotainment focus. They have a fixed offering. This is what it is. And then it's up to the OEM to integrate it. So they've been able to turn this requirements situation around, which is good. But at the same time, I'd argue strongly that this is not an open source solution per se. I mean, the Google Automotive services are definitely not open source. So it's something that creates a bit of movement in the market, but I'd say it's not a big open source platform. I wouldn't be satisfied as an open source proponent if Google dominated the market. That wouldn't have solved my problem. So why is this? I mean, we have a set of OEMs. They act with suppliers that are usually called tier 1s, tier 2s, tier 3s, depending on how close they are to the OEM. So you have an infotainment device manufacturer that produces a silver box, so the actual electronic device that you put in the car with the software. But of course, they source a lot of the software from outside, like speech engines, navigation systems, and all of that. And they do a lot of the software integration. There are quite complex relationships in here. And the tier 1s supply different OEMs in different organizations. And sometimes a tier 2 to one OEM could be a tier 1 to another, and so on. The interesting thing is really what's holding us back. And my conclusion after more than a decade in this is this: you need to scratch your own itch. who are the members, who are the ones contributing and driving the software development in these open source organizations. And to a large extent, it's not the OEMs who solve their own problems. It's the OEMs paying someone to maintain a component. And as soon as that stream of money goes away, the maintenance goes away as well. So you need to really bring the software closer to the OEM. And then we clearly see this in many cases. I mean, Ambition is one case where that happens, but it happens with other OEMs as well. But this, I think, is one of the real factors that needs to go in to change the industry. Unless you scratch your own itch, you're not driven to fix the complex problems behind, which are really more of a business structure or managerial than a technical issue. So what can be done? What challenges do we have? There are tons and tons of challenges. One of the things that I try to tell people when doing interviews or trying to get them to work within infotainment is that this today is primarily not an algorithm or doing cool maths kind of problem area. Then you can go to autonomous driving or do voice recognition engines and smart navigation algorithms. But for infotainment, it's more about the integration of lots and lots of features. And this is where you basically have to pick and choose good infrastructure for various problems and put them together into a complete system. And then I want to relate this then to what happens in the open source space and primarily what happens within KDE. So I mean, where are we close together? Where can we touch base and actually help each other? So I picked out some areas. There are many more. I've worked for more than 2 years in the same project, and we've solved more than 6 projects. It's basically weekly projects. So if you want to hit problems or challenges, just reach out and I can give you one. But the very first one I'd like to bring up is screen dimensions and orientation. You have extremely wide screens in some cars where it fits into the dash on the width. But you also have setups like the Volvo and the recent released new S-Class where you have a standing screen. You also want a single user interface to work in the front where you might have an extremely wide or A4-sized portrait screen with the rear seat where you generally have a smaller screen integrated into the headrest of the front screen. And a good framework for that is needed. So Kirikami and really emphasizing the ability to move between screens and to provide patterns to do that is a really good starting point to get closer here and to get contribution. Another thing is collaboration between screens and users. And I mean, this is where everyone's going now. So, and I mean, if you buy a high-end car, this is probably where you are to some extent, but you want to share information. You want to be able to view the same media content on various screens. You want to be able to pass, let's call it video streams or links to video or whatever, however you do it technically, between the different screens. And this is where technologies like KDE Connect comes into the picture. I love KDE Connect. The game changer to me is just the simple use case of audio ducking when my phone rings. But to take that further, to allow to sort of share, cast, and move things in between screens and devices, that's exactly where we want to go. And then that's exactly where the whole industry is looking for a solution. And if KDE Connect could be part of that, that would be awesome. And I mean, having Plasma Big Screen in there as well excites me because that's very close to a rear seat infotainment system. Is it possible to connect that to KDE Connect? How can we make that generic? Can we allow KDE Connect to sort of be the base for a wider casting, sharing, moving framework? There are big opportunities here. And even more when it comes to this casting and routing and so on, the audio and media routing is one of the things that makes car systems very complex, because in a high-end car you have many cameras for surround views. You have cameras that can create a projection of the car from above, multiple cameras inside, multiple microphones so that you can actually do video calls and text recognitions from the various seats and then locate where the sound comes from. So really building these advanced media routing and audio frameworks is important to validate Linux, but also to Linux with the community services on top of it, like Pipewire and Pulse Audio and so on top of it. And if this thing can be connected to the whole collaboration between Screen Story, that makes it even stronger. We have another one that I'd like to bring up. I like KDE. KDE boots quickly. I run a Pinebook, and I'm impressed over how fast it runs on actual low-end hardware, let me call it that, and then Pine64 can say what they like. But one of the big engineering challenges that I face is really that we have a legal time limit for 2 seconds to have the rear view camera up and running. And generally, you want to have warning sounds before that. And traditionally, you have a requirement to have a full, let's call it desktop experience, but the full infotainment experience and an interactive system up by 4, 5, 6 seconds, depending on the brand. Me being Sweden, it's still summer, but I would hate to have to wait for 15, 20 seconds to be able to turn on the heat in the seat and then start defrosting the windows. You need these things quickly. So keep it light, keep additional features optional, make it possible to load things afterwards, to load things on demand, so to speak. These are important things to make the components reusable, to be able to actually integrate them in this type of system. And then I decided to add 2 more challenges that are good to be aware of, but are hard to solve in a generic enough way, and also in an open source way, because they involve non-open source technology. So one of the trends is that you have a hypervised system in these setups, and to some extent you have another system, be it for instance QNX or Integrity to drive functional safety subsystems, or even a full Android system sitting next to you. And again, here the sharing of video and audio and compositing of graphics and resource sharing is important factors to take into account. But also sharing state. How do you share your contacts? Do you have a centralized service for contacts and so on? And that then leads us over to the functional safety area, where you have things like the telltales in the instrument cluster. It might be if you have an augmented reality system that you actually drive according to. All these things that are sort of puts you in the risk of hurting something, damaging equipment, or even killing people if they fail. And here you generally don't build the systems on Linux, but you need to be able to coordinate the graphics between the different systems. The Qt Safe renderer is out there as one example of how to do it. It's basically a glorified bitlet, but it's written according to all the process rules that needed to get a TIFF approval and to be a part of a functional safe system. So you need to have these flexibilities in, and now Volker is counting down quickly. I'm talking too slowly. So yeah, there are many, many more challenges, and I love to speak about more challenges than the ones I talked about. But why am I even here? I want to tell you all, keep on being awesome, and keep on building infrastructure. I mean, many years ago in a rainy summer, I did this Meta KF5, let's call it embryo, that was later picked up by the community in Volker, which is great because I did not have time to maintain it. But building KDE frameworks, providing Kirigami, providing great documentation and being helpful, these are great things that makes KDE technology attractive. And even though you probably will not see a plasma interface in an actual car produced by an OEM, the underlying technology is so close by, so you probably already share more than you think between your desktop, between what you actually work on, between what you actually improve with the car industry. And having the car industry use it would mean more use cases, more resources to fix issues, to sand off the rough corners and to contribute back. So I really hope for this to move closer. And that means I made it on time, I think. It says 1 minute left on the on the private chat from Volker. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I made some sense, even though I had to run through parts of the slides. And I think it's time for Q&A.
And thank you for sticking perfectly to the schedule. We indeed have a few questions. The one most on people's mind seems to be, what kind of car are you in there?
I actually tweeted about this, so I made some fun of it. A few years ago, I saw an ad for a BMW 7 Series, and they called the back seat the executive lounge. I'm in the back seat of a 12-year-old BMW 5 Series, where my 8-year-old son usually sits, so I had to move over like old food stuff and to actually be able to sit there. So it's very far from the executive lounge, but it's an old BMW.
Okay. Next question is, what form factor KDE is used to are cars most similar to? Desktop, tablet, phone, and is that changing?
It depends on the brand a lot. I mean, the difference between a cheap car and an expensive car is much bigger than you think, hardware-wise. So a high-end car basically has a high-power laptop integrated into it, or multiple laptops, while a low-end car has something like a cheap Android tablet in there. And then, I mean, that's where you've seen Android early on, where the OEMs or their suppliers actually did the porting. But there's a really big difference in how much money you're willing to throw on the hardware, depending on the car. But I'd say in general, it's ARM systems with some sort of OpenGL capable GPU at least, and then it's just a matter of, do you have half a gig of RAM, or do you have 16, 32 gigs of RAM, and then how many cores and so on.
Okay. And the next question is, will cars allow side loading of apps?
This was actually a discussion in an architectural WhatsApp group that I'm a part of at work. They will be app oriented, I think, where basically, because you can't have these big projects where you build a single release for each line, you need to go towards a rolling release model, and you need to let different parts of the software develop at different cadences. If it would be presented as app to the end user is one question. The other one is the end user even allowed to install something, or do you get like an options package that simply defines your applications, and side loading is even one step further? I don't know. It's a management question. I would love to be able to. I would even like to be able to, even though it would void my warranty, because you have a slightly older car. That would mean that you can really bring it forward, and warranty for the infotainment system might not even be something that you worry too much about, because it's already void.
Right. Then the next question we have is, how much do you usually upstream when developing at an OEM? Is there a tendency or effort to upstream more?
I would say that historically it's been very low. I've been in projects where you actually pick the version of all the components at the start of a 3, 4, 5-year project in order to be able to stabilize them, as you put it. And that basically means that even though you upstream something, you're probably 3 to 5 years too late in doing so nobody's interested in it. And there's also the issue that the suppliers are paid to deliver the function and not to work well with upstream. This is one of the reasons for me joining Ambition, because this is an OEM stepping in and taking the integration responsibility. And I mean, I brought up some of the advantages of moving closer to open source, and maintainability is one. And there we're actually fighting very, very hard to find a good way to upstream. And I do know that we have open sourced part of our solution, and we're working on, I mean, it's almost a political work to enable it within the company. How do we do this? How can we allow people to do it? But I know that we are moving in this direction, and I would assume that other engineers are moving in this direction, but I don't know where other OEMs stand on this.
Okay, I think you have already mentioned already answered the next question on how closely you are following upstream. That leaves the last question on how complicated is all this with the conservative software lifecycle in the automotive industry?
I mean, that's the whole complication. The problem is that you're building a piece of software for a specific car, specific hardware device that you upgrade maybe every 3 years, and the whole industry needs to move to a rolling release model somehow, or to decouple the software development from the car. But of course, that clashes a bit in how you traditionally sell and run these companies, because if you get the newest software even in the cheapest model and the high-end one at the same time, it might confuse the customer base. So it's I think it's necessary. The alternative is that Google eats the whole industry as they ate the mobile industry, and they do a rolling software release. So and the OEMs there simply have to live with it, and I think that's where it will land.
Okay, thank you very much, Johan, again. We now have another set of fast track talks coming up in room 1 and in room 2. So here we'll continue in at 7 p.m. UTC with the next talk.
Thank you very much. See you around.
Hi everyone, in room 2. We should be starting in about 4 minutes. Camilo, if you're here, I've made you moderator and the presenter, but you need to connect to audio again to be able to speak. Camilo, if you are here, you might message me here or in the chat. Okay, I see your slides, but you are still muted, so please click on the headphones button somewhere at the bottom, and you should be able to join again as a speaker as well.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, seems to be working. We'll be starting in about 3 minutes. People seem to be just joining in. There is a Q&A session for this talk, so please use the shared notes functionality to ask questions for Camilo. And right on time, we are starting with the Maui project update. Take it away, Camilo.
Hi, so welcome everybody. I'll be talking about some updates, plans, and discussion about the Maui project. So to start, we had our first stable. Okay, so for those who don't know, the Maui project is a group of applications, services, libraries, and a user interface framework, and called Maui Kit, which works on top of Kirigami and is aiming for a convergent and multi-platform experience. So we had a couple months ago our first stable release, and these are some of the topics I'm going to quickly cover in this presentation. So this about the stable release, the current KDE review process, the current state of the project, our plans for the project and roadmap, and last, a little about the Maui project in regards to the consistency in code. So our first stable release, we have packages for Windows, for Android, and also for Linux, both for ARM and regular 64. So we had the first stable release on May. We had a stable release for the framework, Maui Kit, and for 7 applications that covered like file management, image viewer, music player, and note taker, and a simple text editor. We were providing app images, APKs, and some installers for Windows. With these packages, we're targeting Linux, Android, and Windows. So our previous stable release was not ready yet for the KDE review process, which is a standard process to go through to release software on the KDE infrastructure. So right now we are in the middle of the process. We are working on getting Maui Kit, the framework picks, our image viewer, Wait, our music player and index, our file manager, to go through the KDE review. We have already worked on translations, and we have moved from the Qt built-in translation tools to KDE frameworks. And we are in the middle of working on the documentation for Maui Kit. So we are expecting to have all the documentation ready for the next stable release, that is 1.2. That is going to be out by October. And right now, the Maui Key documentation is around 70% ready. We are still missing some inline documentation to QML files. So this is some of the applications that we are currently working on to improve for the next release. And right now I'm going to be talking about the current state of the project. So we are still on the active development. We are working on the documentation. We are aiming for the stable release for October. And we are planning on adding macOS support. So we are going to be releasing packages for this platform. So that will be Windows, Android, Linux, and macOS. Also, we are organizing all the development and infrastructure under KDE events, that being like organizing the issues and bugs and all that stuff. We also have another 5 applications that in beta or alpha state. Some of them are Nitrux Software Store, that is a store for getting up images. We are also have the Cinema, that is a video player, a web browser, and a PDF reader. And we are keeping the convergence always first. So this is a screenshot of some of the applications that in beta or alpha state. And right now I'm going to share to you a quick video of the current state of the applications. So. so far, what I'm trying to showcase in these videos is that we have been working on making the applications more convergent, and this by allowing to have the same interaction that you will have in the desktop to have it on the phone that is a touch-based device input. So, for example, we have a lasso selection that is very common on desktop with a mouse input, and we are bringing this to the touch devices. So we have like a translation of gestures where you have like a long press and a drag. You can trigger the lasso selection. You can also trigger the drag and drop. That previously was not possible. With this new release, we are going to have this, so you can drag and drop items. So this is what I'm showing so far in the video. We're also working on keeping a cohesive and consistent styling across the platforms that we are targeting. So all the applications look the same across all the devices. So we have improved the dialogues, toolbars, and other different UI parts of our framework. These last two slides of this video are actually is working on a Linux machine, but with a touch screen. So all the interactions and the input is being done via touch gestures. So right now I'm going to share a little bit of an interesting experiment that is going to we are trying, that is an immersive experience with the applications. Immersive being that put the content first, so without too much distraction. So I'm going here in the following video going to show you how it looks a little bit in Buo, our note-taking application, Nota text editor, Pix, the image viewer, and also in Wave, our music player. So we have been working in a lot of the applications with the bug reports that we have received, fixing a lot of issues. For example, in Nota, we can already have correctly opening and closing split views, and drag and dropping is working, contextual actions on files is working, like sharing, exporting, and those other actions, and also tagging the files. We have improving also some of the UI components of the applications. Working more into convergence, for example, on Wave, the albums or artists grid view becomes a list view when the space is constrained. And here you have the video. Okay, so going back to the slide. Not sure how to. The slide. So our plans and a roadmap for the upcoming year after we have finished with the release of the next stable release 1.2. These are some of the plans or the tasks we are going to be working on. One is to fully move to CMake. Right now we're using QMake to deploy the applications to platforms like Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android. So we're planning to move fully to CMake. That's going to take some time, but we're going to do it for next year. We plan to add also iOS support. So you can also have, for example, Buo, the note-taking application in your iOS device and also in Linux, or if you use Windows, whatever. And another big part for our convergence first goal is to have data syncing using Nextcloud. Right now, 2 of our applications are using this. Wave can sync and stream music from Nextcloud, and Buo can sync notes. We plan to add more syncing capabilities to index the file manager and to Pix to sync images in your image gallery. So you take your photos on your phone, you can browse them on your computer. We are also working on having some performance boost. The applications have some starting time delay on the phones, not on Android, but on the Pine phone and Linux phones. So we are working on that. Also to have a more cohesive look and feel across all the platforms. So we're aiming for a single style for all the platforms and no dependent on each platform. We're also planning on move to beta the applications, to move to a stable, the applications that are currently in a beta state, being the PDF reader that will have capabilities to scribble, to do doodles, and take annotations over PDFs, and also to keep working on the documentation. So, okay, and the last thing for this presentation that I want to talk about was about the Maui project in KDE and also about the consistency goal. And to start, the Maui project is a whole. This is a project. It's not a separate group of applications that you can divide. I say this because although there is a very good to have consistency in all the software from that KDE provides, this consistency shouldn't not affect the way that we develop the Maui project, meaning that it is a whole project, it's a whole idea, and it's not divided into separate different applications that can be affected by it. We're also we have been a KDE project for over a year now, I think. And another of the reasons that we are following a different design guidelines than the Plasma Kirigami has is to or I can speak for myself, is due to self-expression and being able to pursue our ideas. So this is one of the reasons why it might be seen as the project is in the outskirts of KDE and the consistency goal. So that's kind of what I want to say. Okay, so that's it. If you have any questions, I can answer them.
Thank you. We do have some questions. Let me start. The first one is, what happened to the Maui naming controversy?
What I know is that it has been brought to KDE didn't want to get too much involved, so it was brought to Blue Systems, which has the control over the naming, the pattern, I guess you can say. So that's what I know so far.
Okay. The next one is, how does Maui relate to Kirigami, Plasma Mobile, and the mainline desktop offerings?
So to start, Maui is a KDE project, as Kirigami is also a KDE project in Plasma Mobile. Maui does not follow the Kirigami or Plasma human interface guidelines. It has its own. It also uses Kirigami for some convergent controls. So it is based on Kirigami, and Kirigami is based on Qt controls. So we kind of, what Kirigami doesn't provide for us, or what we want to do different, we provide it with Maui Kit. So that's kind of how it's related to it. The applications can run just fine on Plasma Mobile. Yeah.
Okay. Someone asks, can I avoid opening Android Studio for making Android apps if I make them with Maui?
Yeah, I only use Qt Creator to build the applications and to deploy them too.
Does Maui support theming?
It supports theming as any other Qt application. It is no, like, you can change the style dynamically, not so much in Android or Mac or Windows. On Linux, you can do it very easily by changing the Qt quick control style variable and just creating your own style. So yes, it supports styling to some extent.
Sorry, I was disconnected for a second from the audio. Would it be a good fit for the Librem 5 and other mainline Linux phones?
I just have not been able to test the applications in the Librem phone, but for the past 2 years, I have been able to test the applications on Plasma Mobile on a Google Nexus 5X phone, and they work just fine. So I think yes. I mean, that's our goal, to be able to have the applications running on the phone, but also on the desktop.
Oh, the next one is, I think, a longer one, or for a longer discussion, but we'll try. Thoughts about client-side versus server-side window decorations in a desktop context, specifically from a consistency point of view with other KDE apps?
I didn't get the question.
So basically, client-side versus server-side window decorations.
Okay, so from my personal point of view and opinion, I do like, I think both offer different things. Having client-side decorations allow you more more freedom into designing the application, have a more cohesive look in terms of design. Some applications don't really make sense to have client-side decorations because maybe they are too busy. So having the controls in the head bar doesn't really make sense, but for simple applications, I think it looks good. And we are testing to have this by default.
Okay, next question, and I have a feeling it's from Jonathan. Should I add Maui apps to KDE Neon?
Yes, please, I guess.
Okay. And then I have, are there specific design principles that make Maui human interface guidelines completely incompatible with KDE human interface guidelines?
The question is which design principles are making it incompatible, or I didn't get the question.
Yeah, basically, why are they different from KDEs?
So not really KDE, I will say from Kirigami, the way that it was built, it was based on having these pages navigation, where you have like a row of navigations. You will have like a drawer for two drawers, a global drawer and a contextual drawer. So when I first started working on the music player, that was great. Then I was to start to porting it to Kirigami. Then I noticed I didn't kind of quite like the way that was supposed to be done, having all these actions in the global drawer. I thought it was like a waste. It didn't look that beautiful to me, and it was like a waste of space. So when I started to create the components for Wave the way I wanted to look, and I kind of lost the train of thoughts to the questions, but yeah, it's different. It's a page row navigation. Well, in Maui Kit we have like app views kind of navigation, where you have like an application can have like three of different views, and you navigate between the views, and you don't have like this deep level of navigation that I think is confusing.
Okay, thanks. And I think we have time for only a quick response to, can I currently use CMake to build for Android, and will you suggest it?
Yes, you can do it. I have tried it before and it works okay. The only downside I think is to quickly deploy the APK generated to an Android phone is quite a hassle. But if you do a CMake prefix and you download all the binaries from the KDE Android Docker and you build all your environment, it can be as quickly and as easy as using QMake with Qt Creator.
Okay, that was the end of our time. Thank you very much for this session. Claps in the chat, please.
Okay, bye, thank you.
We're taking a 5-minute break and we'll be with the next panel very soon. Okay, everything seems to be in order. So we'll be starting in 2 minutes. There will be a Q&A session at the very end, so please use the shared notes functionality to ask questions. Let's welcome Leonardo, a.k.a. amyspark, who will tell us about Hollywood and open source.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leonardo Segovia. I'm speaking to you from Argentina. As Adam said, I usually go by the nickname amyspark. I'm amyspark on GitHub. And today I'll be talking about integrating Hollywood open source with KDE applications. And this talk will be a bit on the long side, so please ask any questions in the chat and I'll answer them at the end of this talk. So, for a bit of background, who I am. I've been studying for the Master's in Computer Science since 2017 at the Universidad Nacional del Sur in Bahía Blanca in Argentina. My thesis is in modeling, animation, and rendering of hair and fur in feature animation. I got my bachelor's in computer science the previous year from the same university. My thesis was in real-time collision handling and deformation. I got involved in open source in 2016 with Krita. This was because David Reboy, who is the author of Pepper and Carrot, a webcomic, invited me to contribute to the Krita painting suite. And that kind of snowballed from there. I participated with the Homebrew project between 2017 and 2020, maintaining mainly the task project. And I participated in Google Summer of Code 2018, implementing Zootopia, a hair shader for Blender. In this application, it is named Principal Hair Shader. And my latest participation was in season of KDE 2019, fixing Krita's support for 14-point color-based operations. So, what will this talk be about? This talk is meant to share with you the experiences of working in my GSOC 2020 project. During the past 4 months, I worked on integrating an open source library from Disney Animation called CXpro, which lets us render dynamic textures in Krita like the ones shown in the right. There will be an additional talk in the student showcase next week in which I'll share some details on the Krita side of things. This talk will only cover CXpro and its technical aspects. The key take that I wanted to take it from this talk is that code which is production proven, especially by a big content company like Disney, is not necessarily cross-platform like we would expect for usage here at KDE. Throughout this talk, I want to show you a selection of pitfalls that exist in the original CXpro code and how these were improved in the version that is currently integrated within Krita. This is meant to show you where this kind of code I mean open source, production proven, authored by big companies, can break, and why that could happen. So in the next a few minutes, I'll go over 4 key aspects of the CXplore. The first is assumption that it makes us to the underlying platform. The second is bloat or extra stuff. The third is internationalization efforts. And the fourth point is training. And I close with a summary of my efforts throughout the project. So the first objective of this talk is called platform assumptions. By platform assumptions, I mean the fact that this kind of code runs in common platforms. This means a software configuration that is known and reproducible. For instance, each year, a committee led by the Visual Effects Society Technology Committee releases a version of what is called the VFX reference platform. This is a specification that sets touch version of components like a compiler, libraries, and SDK versions. However, we users of KDE applications run them on just any platform that you can imagine. This is just an example. The localization teams translate application into 70 languages and counting. KDE frameworks runs on almost all of the desktop and mobile operating systems on the face of the earth. Neon, the distribution of KDE, supports two architectures in 64 bits, AMD and ARM. Ubuntu, the upstream distribution, supports not only 64 bits, but also XFCE, ARM, PowerPC, etc., etc. And this whole example doesn't even cover all the possible library versions, for instance, Qt5, instruction section sets, etc., etc. So the key question for working with CXplore is, does it work in all of these possible configurations? The answer is no. This needs to work as it was released is neither platform nor architecture independent. To begin with, there is a platform.h header where they attempt to punch missing defines platform-specific classes like timers and spin locks. But this header assumes that running under Windows means instantly that you are using the Visual C++ compiler, and thus tries to link against the Windows SDK and Visual C++ specific libraries. This should not happen. For instance, Krita in Windows doesn't use Visual C++, but uses Mingu. So it should be able to detect GCC and instead use APIs which are based on Unix. The second point is that CXplore, if enabled, uses SSC4 instructions, which is an extension to the x86 instruction set. These instructions are statically compiled, which means that they are supported by only 98% of the hardware server sample according to Steam as of July 2020. This means that the remaining 2%, which are usually people with other hardware that for some reason cannot run SSC4, will break instantly the Krita for these users. As I said before, they are specified at compile time with a switch flag, which means that if enabled, they will not compile on non-Intel platform for obvious reasons. The worst thing of all this is it is only used in a single function, which is round floating point numbers. So this platform header was easily dealt with. It was a matter of factoring operating system specific items into their own CPP files. I only left opaque types and includes in platform.h. And as for SSC4, for the purposes of JSOC, I left it alone. This is what's hidden behind a CMake flag. I'll show you later if there is more to do about it. Going back to our example, I mentioned that KDE supports more than 70 languages. However, this network does not because it is not locally independent. The definition of locale independent is given in the C++ reference, which says that locale is a set of features that are culture specific, which can be used by programs to be more portable internationally. This, in short, means, among other facets, number formatting, currency symbols, substance separator, and decimal point. Decimal point is key here because there is quite a big bug, and to explain it, we need to jump directly into what I call the innards of CExpr. So, Disney CExpr as a work of computer programming is actually two libraries in one. The first is a language parser, which is based on GNU's general purpose parser generator, which is called Bison, and the lexical analyzer Flex. And the second is a UI toolkit based on Qt, pure Qt. Why is locale decimal point so important here? Because we have a question. Once an expression is parsed, how does this library figure out the value of the number terminals? This is performed in two separate ways. The first one, then the number terminals are directly parsed with a C standard function called atof. And the second one is done in the UI library. Comments are parsed use a function called sscanf. These comments are used by the UI to tell what range does a variable have. The key take here is that both of these functions rely on the current locale of the application. So, the C17 standard in this section 7.11.1.1 says that the default is a locale called C. But in applications that support different cultures like Higuita, this may not be the case. For instance, if you call setlocale with the variable lc numeric, or you set lc all in your user profile, this may not be true. Here I put you a very little example. You define a variable called channel. You give it a value 0.5 or a half, and you say for the UI that the value range is between 0 inclusive to 0.5 inclusive. So, in light of how CExpr parses this, what may be the end result? The answer is it depends on the operating system. On the left, you've got macOS. When you launch the application by double-clicking it, it starts with a clean environment. Unless the developer or the user does something weird with the startup, it has a clean locale, and you get expected results. On the right, you have Linux. In Linux, since all applications inherit the C locale from their parent, which in turn usually gets it from the user profile, stuff happens. The example in the right was gotten with the locale set to Spanish of Spain. The key take here is that the parser is incorrectly locale dependent when it parses its own language syntax. So, fixing this issue means making the parser locale agnostic, which is not easy because the C standard provides no standard way yet. ESD and Windows have _L versions of these functions, atof, strtod, etc. Linux, and by Linux mean both the GNU C library as well as musl, do not provide any of these functions. We've got an excellent alternative to replace this, which is called std from cars in the carcom header from C++ 17. However, Higuita's baseline is C++ 11, not 17. And there is a cross-platform replacement called scnlib from Elias Kosunen on GitHub, which works on C++ 11, but however, its locale support is just a placeholder. It doesn't have any locale support working at present. So for the purpose of JSOC, I elected to replace ATOF with a function called crack ATOF from TMBO. And SSCANF was simply work around by setting and resetting the locale before and after each call. This is just the first objective of our task, so we'll move to the next, which I called bloat. What is meant by bloat in this context? I mean, literally anything that a host application like Rita doesn't need to use or know in order to embed CXport. This means unused and unnecessary features, for instance, code that isn't used anywhere, which appear to be for Disney internal tools, as well as a plugin system. I also mean enlarged headers, for instance, multiple classes per header, as well as not repeating the header and CPP code separation. There is more in the next slide. By bloat, I also mean Qt4 support. This is not only a problem because it has been unsupported in end of life since at least 2015, but because it prevents styling upgrades, as we'll see more later, and it also brings deprecated dependencies like QOpenGL. There are also needed upgrades like find programs for Bison and Flex, where you can just find package, which was the initial intention of Disney, but it was never upgraded. And there is a big need to not blindly install everything at the kitchen sink, just copying and pasting every header to usr-include. And there are no requirements declared, so there is literally no way for you as a developer to know what your application will need to link against at runtime. There is a last one, which I call my favorite because it cost me a big headache, is that macOS and Windows need pre-generated parser files because neither of them bundle Bison or Flex by default. But the current toolchain, as it was shipped by Disney, needs the user to manually copy these files to the build direction, which should be done automatically. As I said before, like the platform pitfall that we saw in the previous section, this can be solved in conceptually simple ways. To begin with, we wall off unused features by putting them behind CMake flags. This was the case of unused Disney internal widgets like Deepwater and Incurve and an entry point called expert main. And the OpenGL-based widgets I put behind us another flag, which is called enable OpenGL dialogues. This point, incidentally, helps us get rid of the deprecated linkage, which is excellent for building with Qt 5. Secondly, and to aid in the above, I refactor widgets as much as possible to split them into header and implementation files. And finally, I ported the destination tab to CMake imported targets, which means that CRP features are now explicitly selectable through the wall of that I described earlier. Everything can now be target linked in the host application, which means that you no longer have to worry about what targets we will need to link against. This is the end of the second objective. We move now to the third one, internationalization, which is one of the most important features of open source. What is formally internationalization? The World Wide Web Consortium calls it, and I summarize, the design and development of an application that enables easy localization for target audiences that vary in culture, region, or language. CXpert is an user-facing library through its UI toolkit, so it should be able to support localization when reporting its results. This means, as I said, displaying error messages and UI text. Let's recall again from the first section. CXpert is conceptually two different libraries, a language parser and a UI toolkit. Localizing the UI toolkit is easy, between brackets, because it was an awful lot of work with regular expressions. However, we are saved by Qt and KDE extracts and make modules to glue the translation files. But this leaves the parser, or in plain terms, how do we localize a library that doesn't use Qt? You can achieve this with two alternatives. The first, you can call L-update, one of the Qt translation tools, by deploying your own translation macros. By this, you can extract the messages, you can later apply the translation from the UI toolkit side. Parameters, example, a given function, here called a set, has no definition. You can probably interpolate this little part in the UI, but if you're going this path, you can go and do something better. What I chose to do for JSOC was to refactor the whole library into error codes with a parameter payload. This means that whenever the parser has an error, it emits an error code with a parameter payload, which is later taken by the UL toolkit. Since the UL toolkit is translated thanks to Qt and XMake modules, this means that host applications are now responsible for performing the interpolation of the message with the supplied payload. Incidentally, this internationalization effort also brings safety improvements. In the left, you can see the code verbatim from the original CXport parser. This is the example that applies when there is a syntax error or the parser gets an end of expression. You can see that this is manually created and then copied using a C function called snprintf. On the right, here you can have a look at how I did it in my project. It is vastly simplified with just an error code, and then the UL library has the responsibility to interpolate it using C++ strings. We are finally at the last section, which deals with how CXport handles theming. By theming, I mean that CXport should respect the application's theme styling and preferences, which means both the user preferences as well as the platform conventions. In the example below, you'll see that Disney did not follow this, as the original widgets are heavily compressed and do not follow the GNOME's convention. In the right, you can see an alpha version of my work, also taken in GNOME, but you'll see that the controls are now much more usable in terms of space and visibility. As demonstrated previously, controls were completely restyled to follow the host application's theming. This involved decompressing all fields or labels or placing what text or icons are shown. Also, upgrading buttons and layouts to modern alternatives, in particular QForm layout and Qtl button. Improving contrast in syntax highlighting, with a big thank you to Agatha for her suggestions. And enable color selections for vector variables. This actually was a hidden feature which was broken in Disney release and was uncovered when I did this decompression work, which means there are now two ways to specify colors by clicking on the variable label or moving the slider beneath each channel's input box. And finally, I fixed help tooltips to make them fully accessible. At this point, I'd like to publicly thank Botolab and Hubble, Agatha, and David Reboy for suggesting many of these improvements. As you may expect from this kind of work, these changes uncover additional mistakes in the developer side of things. I fixed two hidden crashes on CXport that were hidden by the original styling, a buffer underflow when editing color gradients, as well as initializing memory accesses in vector widgets. And as a bonus track, these timing changes enable users to use the export widgets directly with Qt Creator. So, for future improvements, are there any bits that I would like to tackle after GSOC? Yes. A first one, modernize the code base to C++ 11, which brings, as I said before, safety improvements. I would like to fully replace scanf or href with STL alternatives, as well as complete the cleanup of headers into separate files. There is a plugin subsystem that I have not been able to disable yet. I would like to do so, and also see if I can implement this functionality for Windows in a safe way. To make CMake at the configuration step, how to fix these pre-generated parser files, because at this point they still use the build folder that it was used at Disney's. And finally, research if this work could be merged upstream, which is complicated because of the license requirements of the translation teams, and also additional fixes are suggested by users whenever we release Higuita. So for a summary, we covered all problems that I found during the development of this project, and how CXPro was converted from production to a truly cross-platform alternative. In case it wasn't obvious, this version has so many improvements that it's not directly compatible with the original from Disney Animation. And all modifications are available at invent.kde.org/graphics/CXPro. This concludes our journey, and thank you. I'm now open to any questions.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, you're exactly on time to finish, so no Q&A time is left. There were some questions in the shared notes. I guess maybe people can email you.
Okay.
Maybe show the first slide again with your email, and people will, I think, should be able to ask you then. Applause for amyspark, please, in the chat. And for everyone here in room number 2, we are not done for today. In room 1, we'll be having the working group session part 2, starting in 4 minutes. Yep. Okay, thank you again, amyspark. Send over questions to that email address, and see you in room 1 in a few minutes. Again, this was the last session for this room, but go ahead to room number 1 for the working group session part 2, starting in 3 minutes. last warning for everyone still in this room. This was the last session. Please go to room 1 for the working group part 2.